At my rehearsal dinner, my son, just 7 years old, stood up, took the microphone from the DJ, and said, "Before you kiss, I think you should hear what they said about me last night." The room went silent. A fork clinked against a plate. Every eye turned toward him. Some people laughed, expecting a joke. But I didn't. I knew exactly what he was about to say. My name is Ayla Morgan. I'm 34, a single mom, and until that moment, I thought I was finally getting my fairy tale ending. I was marrying the love of my life, Nathan, a man who never once made my son feel like a burden. We were standing on the edge of a new beginning, surrounded by family, candles flickering, laughter bouncing off the barn walls. Except not everyone in that room was happy for us. Not everyone welcomed my son. My father, Charles, was seated near the front. He was always a man who cared more about his public image than his private integrity. And beside him was my stepmother, Elise, a woman who wore her judgment like perfume. I'd spent years watching her treat my son like an inconvenience. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But last night I heard them say something I can never forget. I said nothing then. I smiled through dinner. I toasted to love and family. I acted like I hadn't heard a thing, and now here we were. My son, standing alone in front of everyone, holding that microphone in both hands, his little face serious and sure. I had no idea he'd heard them, too. What he said next changed everything. The barn looked like something out of a magazine. String lights hung in soft curves across the rafters, casting a golden haze over long wooden tables lined with fresh greenery, ivory roses, and gold-rimmed glassware. It smelled like pine and candle wax and something warm baking in the kitchen. Everyone kept saying how beautiful it all was, how perfect, how romantic. And it was, on the outside at least. Inside, I felt like I was holding my breath. I kept one hand on my wine glass and the other on my son, Liam, who was sitting beside me in a tiny dress shirt and suspenders, his feet swinging just above the floor. His hair was still damp from the quick bath I'd given him an hour earlier. He had blueberry stains on the cuff of his sleeve, and he was humming under his breath as he pushed a grape tomato around his plate. He looked so small in that chair, but to me, he filled the entire room. I was getting married the next day to a man who had never once made me feel like I had to choose between being a mother and being loved. Nathan was everything my son and I had ever needed: steady, kind, present. He never talked down to Liam. He never hesitated to include him. The first time Liam got sick with the flu, Nathan was the one holding the bucket and wiping his forehead. That was the night I knew I wanted to marry him. And now we were here, at our rehearsal dinner, surrounded by people who had traveled to celebrate with us. Friends, co-workers, cousins, even some people I hadn't seen in years. And then there was my father, Charles, and his wife, Elise. They sat at the center table, smiling for photos, raising their glasses at every toast, acting like they were part of this story. But they never had been. When my son was born, my father visited the hospital once, stayed for less than 15 minutes, and left before holding him. Elise didn't come at all. She sent flowers that said best wishes, as if I'd opened a bakery, not given birth. When I moved back to Asheville after my divorce, I reached out to them hoping things might be different. They weren't. They invited me to brunches and fundraisers. They introduced me as Ayla, Charles's daughter, the one who works in education. They never once said I was a mother. They never asked to see Liam. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that we didn't need them, and we didn't. But when I got engaged, I thought maybe this would be a new start. Maybe standing in front of them as a bride, with my son by my side and a man who truly loved me waiting at the altar, would shift something in them. Maybe they'd see what they'd been missing. So I invited them. At the dinner, Elise wore a cream-colored designer dress and pearls the size of grapes. She gave a brief toast, complimented the lighting and the wine, then sat down like she was waiting for someone to applaud. My dad laughed at all the wrong moments and seemed annoyed when Liam tried to show him the paper airplane he'd made from a menu. I caught the look Elise gave him, tight-lipped and cold, like she was embarrassed by him. Liam didn't notice. He was too busy watching Nathan talk to the bartender and asking me if there would be dancing after dinner. I looked at him and thought, maybe this is enough. Maybe they'll never be what I want them to be, but I have my son, and I have Nathan, and that's everything. He turned to me and asked, Mama, are we going to be a real family tomorrow? I smiled, brushing a crumb off his cheek. We already are, baby. His eyes lit up and he leaned his head against my shoulder. I kissed the top of his head and held him close, letting his weight settle into my side. That moment was real. That was the part I wanted to remember. Not the stiff nods from Elise, not my father's distracted gaze, just me and my son, and this small, quiet promise between us. Nathan walked over, tousled Liam's hair, and kissed my temple. You two look like a postcard, he said, laughing, and for a second I believed in the picture. Until later that night, when I passed by my father's hotel room on the way to drop off Liam's overnight bag, the door wasn't fully closed. I heard Elise's voice. I heard my father's answer. I heard everything. But that came later. At the dinner, with soft music playing and fairy lights glowing all around us, I was still pretending the cracks in the frame didn't matter, and my son was still smiling. The hallway smelled like citrus cleaner and carpet glue. I was walking Liam back from the pool, his overnight bag slung over one shoulder and a towel dragging behind him like a cape. He was chattering about cannonballs and how many cookies he thought he could sneak from the front desk. I smiled and nodded, half listening, my mind already on the last-minute things I needed to prep before the wedding. As we turned the corner toward our room, I passed my father's suite. The door was cracked just a little, the kind of careless mistake people make when they think they're in private. I stopped for only a second, just long enough to pull the towel off Liam's foot. That's when I heard her voice. Once they leave for the honeymoon, put the boy in care. We're not babysitters, Charles. My whole body froze. Of course, my father replied. He doesn't fit the new image anyway. A ring bearer, maybe, but not a long-term accessory. It's not like he's ours. Liam had stopped talking. He looked up at me with wide, questioning eyes, his grip tightening on my hand. I didn't say anything. I just took his towel, opened our room, and guided him inside. Once the door shut, I leaned against it, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked at my son. He had already climbed onto the bed and was flipping through his comic book, his small feet swinging like nothing had happened. I didn't know if he had fully heard. I hoped he hadn't. I wanted to believe he was still floating in that soft, innocent space where adults are safe and families are forever. But I had heard, every word, and I couldn't unhear it. I stood in the middle of the room, my fists clenched at my sides. My throat was tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march back down that hallway, throw open the door, and make them say it again to my face. I wanted to demand they look at Liam and repeat those words out loud. Instead, I sat down at the edge of the bed and picked up one of his socks from the floor. I folded it, then unfolded it. I tried to keep my breathing even. I had spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval. When my mom died, I thought maybe he'd draw closer to me. Instead, he remarried a woman who erased everything soft in our home and replaced it with crystal and silence. I spent years accepting crumbs of attention, hoping one day it would feel like love. It never did, but I kept trying. Now they were talking about my son like he was some burden to be hidden, like he didn't matter, like he wasn't mine. I thought about Nathan, about how he held Liam's hand when we crossed streets, about the night Liam had a fever and Nathan stayed up all night reading him stories, about the time he called Liam my boy at a barbecue, and Liam's whole face lit up. This wedding was supposed to be a celebration of that love, a promise that our little family was real and permanent. But how could I go through with it knowing my father thought my child didn't belong? I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Liam, watching the rise and fall of his chest, his fingers curled gently against his cheek. I kept replaying the words over and over. Put the boy in care. He doesn't fit the new image. I wanted to believe I could just ignore it, that I could let them attend the wedding, pose for pictures, give their stiff hugs, and then disappear from our lives for good. But ignoring it felt like betrayal, not just of Liam, but of myself. In the morning, I looked in the mirror while brushing my teeth. My eyes were red and my smile felt wrong. I tried to shake it off. I told myself, just get through today. Smile for the rehearsal dinner. Thank the guests. Tomorrow, say your vows. Then cut them off forever. But when I zipped Liam into his outfit that evening, he paused and looked up at me. Mom, he said, his voice small and quiet, Did Grandpa forget to hug me yesterday? I stopped. My hands froze on the zipper. He wasn't asking for attention. He was asking for reassurance. He was asking if he still mattered. I knelt down, cupped his face, and kissed his forehead. "You are everything," I said. "Anyone who can't see that is wrong." He nodded slowly, but I saw it in his eyes. He had heard more than I wanted him to. He had felt the shift. I stood up, heart pounding, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let them pretend anymore. I wasn't going to let them smile for photos and play gracious grandparents for show. I didn't know how it would unfold. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stay silent again. The morning of the wedding rehearsal, the air outside was cool and clean, but my chest felt tight. I stood at the sink in the bridal suite, brushing through my hair while Liam sat behind me on the couch, working on a coloring book Nathan had packed for him. Every so often he'd call out to me to check if he was staying in the lines. "Look at the wings on this dragon, Mama," he said. I turned, forcing a smile. "It looks amazing, sweetheart." He smiled, then went back to coloring. I watched him for a second longer, trying to memorize the curve of his smile, the way he bit his lip when he was focused. He was still just a little boy, but he had already been exposed to something he never should have heard, something he never should have had to carry. I had barely spoken to my father or Elise that morning. I couldn't look at either of them without hearing their voices from the night before. I kept picturing their faces at the dinner, acting like everything was fine, laughing, toasting, pretending. I'd always known Elise didn't love my son. She tolerated him, treated him like a distant obligation. But hearing her say it, so casually, like he was a stray someone had brought home, that had ripped something wide open in me, and worse than that was hearing my father agree. No hesitation, no defense. They didn't just not love him, they didn't see him, and now I couldn't unsee who they were. I paced the room, phone in hand, debating if I should call Nathan. I could tell him everything. We could cancel the dinner or the wedding or all of it. He'd listen. He always listened. But then what? Would I be the dramatic daughter again, ruining her own wedding with another outburst? Would anyone believe me? I had no recording, no proof, just a memory that burned every time I blinked. And then there was Liam. I looked at him again, now kneeling on the floor, sorting through his crayons. He had put on his little brown shoes without being asked. He was trying so hard to be good, to be easy, to be helpful. My heart ached with the weight of it. There was a knock on the door. Nathan stepped in, holding 2 coffees. He kissed my cheek, then handed me one. "Everything okay?" he asked, searching my face. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just tired." He reached over to straighten my necklace. "Well, it's your big day. Try to breathe." I wanted to tell him. I really did. But I also didn't want this day to be defined by them. They had taken so much already. I wasn't going to let them take this too. Instead, I told myself I'd wait until after the wedding. I'd cut them out. I'd draw a firm line. We'd build our life without them. That would be my revenge. Not anger, not confrontation, just absence. That was the plan. Quiet, clean, controlled. But that plan started to unravel the moment we stepped into the rehearsal dinner. The barn looked beautiful again, just like the night before. Long tables, candles, soft music. But it felt different this time. Everyone was a little more dressed up. The photographer moved between tables, snapping candid shots. The DJ tested equipment at the front of the room. Liam was sitting next to Nathan, showing him a drawing he'd made of our family. And then I saw my father and Elise arrive. She was wearing a navy silk dress with matching heels. My father was in a gray suit, freshly pressed, a gold watch visible beneath the cuff. They smiled politely as they greeted guests, nodding at Nathan's parents, posing for photos, acting like the kind of people who belonged in a wedding album. I stayed at my table and watched them, and the longer I watched, the more it burned. They didn't deserve to be here, not after what they said, not after how they made my son feel. I was halfway through standing up when Liam tugged on my sleeve. "Mama, are there going to be speeches again?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Probably some toasts like last night." "Can I say something?" he asked, eyes wide and excited. "Like a speech? I want to say something nice." I froze. "You want to say something at the microphone?" I asked, unsure. He nodded. "Just a little part." I smiled. "Maybe. We'll see, okay?" I should have said no. I should have prepared for what he might do, but part of me believed he just wanted to thank Nathan or tell a funny story. He was always so thoughtful, always paying attention, and part of me, if I'm honest, was too tired to think it through. The evening moved forward. Plates were cleared, glasses refilled. The DJ adjusted the mic and announced it was time for speeches. I listened as Nathan's father told a story about our first dinner together. My maid of honor shared an embarrassing memory from college. The room was warm with laughter, wine, and easy joy. Then the DJ started handing out microphones, and Liam stood up. That was the moment I realized my silence hadn't protected him. He had heard, he had seen, and now he had something to say. Liam stood up before I could say anything. His chair scraped softly against the floor. He was holding the microphone in both hands, gripping it like it was something sacred. His little face was serious and calm, but his shoulders were tense. The DJ looked at me for approval. I gave a small nod, though my heart was pounding. I didn't know what my son was about to say, but the air in the room shifted. It felt like the moment before a storm, where everyone senses something coming without knowing why. Liam looked out at the crowd. Dozens of faces turned toward him. Most were smiling gently, expecting something sweet, something cute. A few chuckled, thinking a child's speech would be a brief and harmless moment. At the center table, my father set down his wine glass and leaned back. Elise barely looked up from her phone. Liam raised the microphone to his mouth. His voice was clear. "Before you kiss," he said, "I think you should hear what they said about me last night." The room fell completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. You could hear the buzz of the speakers, the soft creak of a chair shifting. People stopped chewing. Forks hovered mid-air. My stomach dropped. Liam turned to look at my father and Elise. His voice didn't waver. "I was behind the couch in your room. I heard you. You said I should be put in care. You said I don't fit, that I'm not part of the family." Someone in the back gasped. I felt like I had stopped breathing. I stood up slowly, my hand on the edge of the table. My chest was tight, but my eyes were locked on my son. Liam looked back at the guests. "But my mom says I am part of the family. She says I'm everything. And Nathan says I'm his boy, too." Nathan stood up and walked to him. He placed a hand gently on Liam's shoulder, then looked out at the stunned room. "He is," Nathan said. "He's my son. I've known that since the second time I met him, when he fell asleep in my arms and drooled on my shirt." Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft and shocked, a release of the tension that had been building like a pressure valve ready to burst. Nathan looked at me. "Ayla, come here." I walked to them, my legs shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I just knew I needed to be next to them. When I reached Liam, I knelt down beside him. I brushed the hair off his forehead and kissed his cheek. He looked at me, waiting. I stood up and took the microphone from his hand. I turned to face my father. "You once told me that family was about loyalty," I said. "You said that when I was 15 and I lied to protect a friend. You told me family came first. Here you are, sitting in a room full of people who love my son, and you couldn't even pretend to include him." I looked at Elise. "You've never accepted him. That was your choice. But speaking about a child like he's some inconvenient package you're forced to carry, that was never yours to say." I turned back to the room. For anyone here who believes Liam isn't part of this family, feel free to leave. Because tomorrow, when I walk down that aisle, I'm not just becoming Nathan's wife. I'm standing up there as a mother who will never again stay silent to keep other people comfortable. No one moved. My father shifted slightly in his seat. Elise looked stunned. They had not expected to be called out, not by a child, not in public. Nathan took the microphone. "There's no part of this family that Liam doesn't fit. If anything, he's the heart of it. I'm proud to be his dad, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life proving that." Applause broke out. It started soft, hesitant, but it grew. People stood. Guests wiped their eyes. My maid of honor came forward and wrapped her arms around Liam, and my father, Charles Morgan, the man who taught me to speak only when spoken to, sat with his arms crossed, silent. That was the moment everything changed. Not just the dynamic between us, not just the tone of the evening, but something deep in my own spine. For the first time in my life, I had not swallowed the pain to protect the peace. I had let it rise. I had let it speak. and it had come out of the mouth of the one person they tried to erase. I held Liam's hand and we walked back to our table. Nathan sat on my other side. His fingers brushed against mine. Liam leaned in and whispered, "Did I mess it up?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, you told the truth." And truth in that moment was the most beautiful thing in the room. The morning of the wedding, the sky was clear. Sunlight filtered through the trees, lighting up the windows of the small chapel where we were set to say our vows. The air smelled like lilacs and warm grass. Everything looked perfect. But this time, it wasn't the decorations or the setting that mattered. It was the people who showed up. We had fewer guests than expected. Several of my father's business associates, some distant cousins from his side, and one or two social acquaintances of Elise had canceled overnight. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. The silence of people who quietly chose sides spoke louder than any message they could have sent, but the ones who stayed with full hearts. Nathan's parents helped tie Liam's bow tie. My best friend printed a last-minute speech that included Liam's name in every paragraph. My college roommate flew in early that morning and brought 2 giant trays of homemade cookies because she said love deserved cookies. I stood at the back of the chapel holding Liam's hand. He looked up at me in his tiny gray suit, still slightly crooked no matter how many times we tried to straighten it. He was holding a small pillow with our rings tied to it. His eyes were wide but calm. "You ready, Mama?" he asked. I took a breath and nodded. "Let's walk." And so we did. We walked together, down the aisle, past rows of people who smiled with their whole faces. I didn't need a father to give me away. I had already given myself away 1,000 times to people who never deserved it. Not anymore. When we reached the altar, Nathan stepped forward. He didn't just look at me. He looked at Liam. He bent down, met his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for walking your mom to me." Liam nodded, proud and serious. He handed Nathan the pillow, then stepped to the side and stood with the wedding party. No one had asked him to. He just knew. The ceremony was short, but every word landed deep. The vows Nathan wrote didn't just speak to me. They spoke to the life we were building together. He promised to love me, protect our home, and honor the boy who came with me. He said loving Liam was never a condition of being with me. It was part of how he loved me. There was no version of our life without him. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at Liam first. "Some people believe a child can be an inconvenience," I said. "Others believe a child is a gift. Loving you has never felt like a burden. It has felt like a purpose. You made me a mother. You made me brave. And when I doubted whether I should speak, you stood up and spoke for us both." Liam's eyes shimmered. He didn't cry. He just nodded, holding it in like a grown man. I turned to Nathan. "You never asked me to quiet who I was. You never made me shrink to fit into your world. You didn't just accept my son. You loved him first. And that's why I trust you with every part of me." After we said our vows and the rings were exchanged, the officiant smiled. "You may now kiss the bride." Before we could move, Liam's voice rang out from the side. "Now you can kiss." Everyone laughed. Nathan kissed me. And when we turned to walk down the aisle, we didn't walk out as 2 people. We walked out as 3. At the reception that followed, we danced under strings of warm lights. Liam had his own mini spotlight on the dance floor. He twirled and laughed and ran between tables with frosting on his cheek. Nathan's dad lifted him onto his shoulders. Someone started a conga line. I stood with a glass of champagne, watching my son light up the room, and I felt something in my chest loosen and settle. It wasn't peace with my father. It wasn't forgiveness for Elise. It was something stronger than that. It was acceptance that they were never capable of being who I needed them to be. And it was the quiet, steady understanding that I had stopped needing their approval altogether. I had spent years waiting for my father to see me, waiting for him to claim me, validate me, make room for my life. And in doing that, I had stayed silent in too many moments where I should have stood up. But this time I had spoken. Or rather, Liam had, and his voice carried the weight of all the things I had swallowed. Later that night, as I tucked him into bed in our suite, he looked up at me and asked, "Did I make it better or worse?" "You made it true," I said. He nodded. "That's good, right?" I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, That's the best thing you could have done. And it was. Because in one moment of courage, with a microphone too big for his hands and a voice clear enough to silence a room, my son reminded everyone exactly what love is supposed to look like. Not polite, not perfect, not quiet, but honest, fierce, unshakable, and forever. Sometimes it takes the smallest voice in the room to speak the biggest truth. My son reminded me that silence protects no one, and that family isn't about blood or appearances. It's about love that shows up, stands up, and speaks up when it matters most. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, or reminded you of your own power to protect what matters, please take a moment to like the video. It helps more people hear stories that deserve to be told. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up for someone when no one else would? I read every single one, and I'd love to hear from you. And if you believe in the power of truth, love, and real family, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this again. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this with me. And most of all, thank you for listening.